I would like to make a start with reflection of day one. Dear educators, welcome to the second day of the 2024 AUF Education Convention, Unleashing Learner Potential. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their ongoing connections to land, sea, and community. I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be participating in this virtual event today. What an educational feast day one was. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. It was an enriching and insightful day for many, if not all. I trust you have valuable reflections on the discussions and conversations, especially in the chat box. I would like to take the privilege of this platform to share my reflections on the keynote and featured speakers from yesterday. We began day one by unpacking cognitive load theory, CLT, in our first session. The discussion clarified the distinction between working memory and long-term memory and highlighted strategies to support the transfer of information between the two. These strategies included the use of graphs, presentations, demonstrations, visuals, chunking, and front-loading, with front-loading in particular capturing my attention. I guess that way you prepare your audience. The presenters concluded beautifully by emphasizing that CLT is neither the starting point nor the end goal. It is simply a tool to help students function better. Ultimately, everything comes back to the teacher-student relationship. This session was further enriched in the afternoon during one of the concurrent sessions where I attended Emeritus Professor John Sivada's Q&A on CLT. As the recognized father of CLT, cognitive load theory, Professor Sivada provided thought-provoking insights. One particular exchange stood out by this question: how can teachers differentiate instruction to account for students' varying levels of cognitive load? And his answer to this: there is no real solution other than treating them differently. Handle differences in students' knowledge by treating them differently. That's a practical problem. How is that possible? Question continued. Try as far as possible to organize your classroom so that students in each group are similar. Our day one keynote speaker, Carol Fox, delivered a compelling talk titled Communicating Confidently in a Post-Pandemic Era. She discussed our communication preferences: visual 40% of people, kinesthetic 30%, auditory 20%, and data digital 10%. Carol highlighted that as teachers, we embody a combination of all these preferences. You might remember the activity where we counted the white team's passes, only to miss the man in black bear costume walking through. The next slide reinforced the message. It is easy to miss something you are not looking for. Carol then posed a reflective question. What else are we missing out in our lives that we are not looking for? This got me thinking. I particularly appreciated her lighthouse analogy at the end. Lighthouse keepers shine their light regardless of how ships respond. Reflecting on this, I see lighthouses as solitary yet steadfast, and during the wildest weather, while shining through the darkest moments, to serve as a beacon of hope for all. Perhaps we should all find our lighthouses in our lives. Today, our featured speaker is Stephen Kolber, who will explore the fascinating topic of ancient and modern pedagogies for an AI-infused world. I'm genuinely curious about this comparison. Our keynote speaker in session 2 today is Luca Perry, founder of the Learning Future, who will present on the future of learning is human. As a global speaker, learning strategist, and education futurist, Luca advocates for the importance of relationship. He will challenge us to rethink the social capital of schools and the significance of placing relationships at the core of education, not only for students, for all of us. I look forward to another day of inspiration and engagement. Let's continue to unleash the potential of every learner. For some housekeeping issues, over to you, Alper.
Thank you. So, again, please use the chat to share your insights and reflections, and please use the Q&A for your questions. And during the afternoon sessions, please mute your mics and turn on your cameras. Please join the final closing remarks session today promptly at 3:30 p.m. All prize winners, they will be announced during this session, and you need to be present with your camera on to be an eligible prize winner. All prizes are randomly drawn. They will be handed to you at the beginning of the academic year, whether you reside in New South Wales or Perth. And the survey link will be pinned to the same place where announcements are. It will also be emailed to you, and I'll put it in the chat as well during the closing remarks session. And we're going to send a certificate of attendance to all participants at the end of the convention. It's via email, and it has a QR code as well, so you can always verify this certificate of attendance. It's a different kind of certificate of attendance, a postmodern one, I'll say. And finally, all sessions are recorded, so you may access all sessions, including the ones that you didn't attend, from the lobby. It will remain open until February 2025. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator. So Kevsar, an ex-Amity teacher and one of the first nationally certified lead teachers in Victoria, will introduce our featured speaker. Over to you, Kevsar.
Thank you, Alper. Hi, everyone. I feel privileged to moderate this session for another Melbourneian teacher. I'm joining you from Melbourne, from Haileybury College, and I'm so happy to be part of this amazing professional learning. Today, we will be having Stephen Colbert from Melbourne. So that makes me happier to moderate this session. So Stephen is a curriculum writer at the Faculty of Education within the University of Melbourne, and he was a proud public school teacher for 12 years, being named a top 50 finalist in the Worky Foundation's Global Teacher Prize. He is passionate about teacher collaboration, which he supports through organizing Teach Meets and running Edu Reading, an online academic reading group. His most recent publication, Empowering Teachers and Democratizing Schooling Perspectives from Australia, co-edited with Kate Haggard, explores these topics further. Stephen has represented teachers globally for Education International at the International Labour Organization, the OECD's Global Teaching Insights, and UNESCO's Teacher Task Force 2030. So Stephen is very, very collaborative. If you just Google or YouTube his name, and hundreds of videos of him sharing his practice about integrating technology in his teaching. So I would highly recommend to watch his videos to get ideas to add to your teaching tool. So it's on to you now, Stephen. And during the session, please do ask questions. I will be conveying your questions to Stephen.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kevsar, Alper and Denise. Wonderful. That's quite an intro. I'll have to cut it down and make it more short, I think. But good to see everyone. As I said to Denise when we started, this is always the best dressed conference I present to. I don't know why, but that's my noticing. And very slick, all organized in the Zoom app, which is really impressive as well. So as everyone sort of said, I'm going to be talking about choosing the right pedagogy in the age of AI. So we'll be jumping across topics. It's sort of, I don't know, I think of this presentation as kind of the synthesis of my teaching career, and very much so now working at the University of Melbourne looking back, I guess, and reflecting on that and trying to sort of make sure I'm backing everything up with research evidence and publishing around it and those kind of things. So very exciting to hear that you got to hear from Dr. Professor Sweller. I was like, oh, cognitive load theory, that's an interesting topic, and it's his topic, so that's good. So let's do it. I'm standing around waiting for this to work. There we go. Just, I work in the Indigenous education space, so I always like to call out my personal history and positionality. So I'm a non-Indigenous man. My family arrived from the First Fleet and has been a family of teachers ever since. And my father is from Poland via a displaced persons camp. There's a very small word on there for some reason. And I'm very much a teacher who works currently at a university rather than vice versa. Just to acknowledge country, as in the same place as Kevza, we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, members of the Kulin Nation, and we recognise them as the first teachers and leaders. And I'll be trying to commend some of that knowledge and wisdom to you in this session as we go through ancient teaching pedagogies. So just real quickly, I'll give you a bit of a flying tour of sort of what I've seen happening in sort of the space of education around pedagogy and why it's sort of become increasingly political. Like cognitive load theory itself is the kind of thing that is like, divides people. Are you following cognitive load theory? Is it too simplistic? Is it too complex? Which camp are you in? All those sort of things. Then we'll talk a little bit about teaching in the age of AI, and it's mostly critical things to be wary of, as I've found myself more and more using the tools and watching and guiding and helping other teachers to use them as well. I'm noticing a lot of things that maybe go underappreciated, under-realized, I guess. Then basically it's hundreds of slides, depending on how much time we have to get through, of different pedagogies and theories and actual teaching practices you can pick up and use in the class tomorrow that I'll run through tomorrow. Yeah, if your students are still here, depending on where you're at. And then, I'll be, prompting you at various points to jump in and contribute or chat and those sort of things. So just, before we jump in, a bit of theory. These are all the gojis. Oh, chat. Oh, yeah. Well. Oh, morning, Emma. Just to say, most of what we do is pedagogy. Goji being like the study of, the teaching of. Pedagogy being teaching young people. Andragogy is what we're doing right now. And hutagogy is a fancy one very few people have heard about, but that's basically when you start to teach yourself. So if you've ever studied, I would say that all teachers are participating in what we call hutagogy, which sounds weird to pronounce even as I say it, which is sort of the ongoing self-determined learning. So, at the end of every day, you sit there with a tear in your eye or not and think, how did that go? How can I make that better? All those sort of things. So that's sort of hutagogy, and probably most of what happens in a university is that as well. Like, though you are being taught, most of it is you reading and exploring by yourself. Just so you can impress your friends with that. Next time someone says pedagogy, you can say, well, technically we're doing andragogy. Yeah, I can't see anyone. So by all means, type in the chat and I'll stay awake. I put it just a bit of a brief history of kind of how teaching became increasingly sort of seen as a science rather than an art. And it all started with Marzano, which most people aren't aware of, but he was sort of the John Hattie before John Hattie, if people know who John Hattie is as well, I'm assuming. And so he basically was like, let's look at the art and science of teaching. Let's try and simplify, not simplify, but kind of look at the best way that we can be doing all of these things. And then we had John Hattie, his seminal book in 2008, which then exploded into every visible learning book possible, including the sequel, which is about, thick as the Bible, and is on lots of principals' desks and things, but often not read as closely as perhaps he would like. So broadly speaking, there's a traditional way of teaching, which is, you're talking about your direct instruction, which comes very much out of John Sweller's sort of approach, which is that we have a simple version of the brain, which is you've got short-term memory, long-term memory, and the goal of teaching is to get everything into long-term memory. And to do that, you do lots of the things that are along the side. You do activate prior knowledge. You have a really clear lesson closure and open. You go from we do, I do, you do, sort of moving through those panels. And as much as possible, you're doing retrieval practice and those sort of things. So obviously, I'll be drawing on that when we get to sort of the teaching facing section. The most extreme version of that is what's called explicit direct instruction. And as you can see on the right, TAPL, teach first, ask a question, pause, pair, share, and point, pick a non-volunteer, listen to the responses, effective feedback. So that's kind of your Dylan Williams approach where, even like you don't just ask students questions, you get a cup full of popsicle sticks with various people's names on it so that you make sure you're not just asking the confident kids to answer questions, those sort of things. I'm not sure, Kevza. I think Azu had it up from the start. But anyway, Azu, if you want to jump in. So explicit direct instruction is like quite a narrow focus and quite a sort of mechanistic way of doing things. Like it's not, how are your students feeling, follow your heart. It's literally you would go through TAPL each lesson and in each little teaching module as well. So that's the goal. Then again, you're thinking anytime your school or your leadership or yourself look at kind of having a lesson structure, you're thinking learning intention, success criteria. Anytime you're doing these sort of things, you're taking what's broadly considered the traditional approach. So again, this is the explicit direct instruction. So learning intention, success criteria all come out of that. You explain the lesson importance. So you say, like, why does this matter in their lives kind of thing, which of course is something we all should do more of. You activate prior knowledge, then you do I do, we do, you do, which I think I got the other way around before. Then revisit, review, reflect, and project. So all of these things are making learning predictable and sort of easy to follow, which is especially important for, refugee background students and those kind of students who perhaps aren't as experienced in schooling as others. So you make it as clear as possible. But of course, even as I'm saying that, you're imagining some of this can be a little bit restricting in your practice. If every lesson started with you're about to learn this and then at the end was let's check that you've learned it, that becomes perhaps a little bit repetitive and boring and lacks some of the creativity that, I remember teachers of old saying, students would come into the class and there'd be like a chocolate under every seat, and then the students would have to work out who was who, and then that was used to explain statistics and all those kind of things. Students would come into the room and there was a pretend dead body on the floor. It was a crime scene. All of those kind of things probably don't fit too neatly in this traditional approach, but too often it's probably set up a bit of a dichotomy as well. Oh, there we go. And so the rise of the instructional model, it would be hard to find, I think, a school that doesn't have an instructional model. And if you looked at them all side by side, you'd see a lot of the echoes of the sort of history that I've presented really briefly to you, which is, I do, we do, you do, kind of the gradual release of responsibility type model, all those sort of things. And then increasingly we're seeing the explosion of the science of. So we've got the science of learning, the science of reading, the science of maths. I'm just waiting for the science of science to come out, and then we'll be full circle sciencing our science. But of course, this is again out of the John Swaller approach, which is like, let's systemize and science everything, and then then you can kind of, and it's not a dichotomy necessarily between explicit and discovery, but that's kind of often how it's framed. So explicit instruction is one side, then we bring in discovery, which has a lot of different names, and usually it's kind of about, all these sort of things. And I think Luca Parry, who will follow me as the keynote, is very much from the inquiry approach. So this might be good, a good primer for what he's going to talk about. Though I am just assuming that I'll have to tune in after and see what he's exploring at the moment in his work. But you're thinking of inquiry. So you start with a question, you build on students' prior knowledge, which is a similarity, and there's different levels of inquiry. And of course, for lots of people, they would say, young students are too young for inquiry. They don't have the background knowledge, they don't have the pre-established skills to explore all this stuff. but then everyone ends up at a university where that's basically what they're being asked to do. Then you can think about interdisciplinary ways, which again would come into the sort of discovery learning approach, which is like rather than doing science in science or the science of science in science, you might start to bring things together. You might be in a group of teachers saying, you as an English teacher, maybe you can be analyzing argument, whereas, when they're in the science class, they'll be developing an experiment or they're, providing a product in science based on a scientific approach, and then they're advertising it in English. Those kind of things are starting to happen. But probably because it's more complicated, I would say the inquiry happens a lot less in schools. And then there's a whole debate around whether it's disciplinary, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, or transdisciplinary. And again, each of those is sort of a pathway of complexity in much the same way that the traditional approach gives you all these complicated steps along the way that you can, depending on how far down the rabbit hole you go. Obviously, it goes without saying that each of these, depending on the day, depending on your students, depending on the weather outside, so many other factors, teachers switch in and out of increasingly. And so it's really important, I think, that we as teachers and educators don't sort of fall into the false dichotomy of, I'm an English teacher, they're a maths teacher, they're an early childhood educator, we're completely different. They work in a special school. All those kind of divisions probably aren't helping us, I don't think. But I want to ask you, what do we think, for you, is teaching more of an art or more of a science? And of course, the answer is a bit of both. But if you had to lean more towards one side, what would you say? And where would you place it? And again, I'll pause and give us some take-up time to chat. Kevza, can I ask you? You're the. I feel like I'm being introduced by someone much more important than me. The first Holt ever. What do you think? Art, science, both? If you had to lean one way, which would you say?
It is a both. I'm with you with this one. So I think there is lots of science in learning, how the brain works, how the learning process occurs through AUF. I think conferences over the years with Jared Cooney-Howard, we were very I think privileged in that sense to learn from him over the last 2 years. So there is a lot of science of it. But when it comes to teaching, I think teaching is a lot more art. So there is lots of creativity, there is lots of authenticity, so much personality. So I feel like it's a combination of both, two wings for a teacher that's required.
Yeah, definitely. And you wouldn't want one over the other. The clear winner, there's lots of both, more art, more. Osama's the clear winner so far with it feels more like a science on the tough days and more of an art on the good days. I feel that in my bones, to be true. Yeah, it's sort of like, when you wake up in the morning and you're like fizzing with ideas, it's like, oh, I'm an artist. Look at me go. And then, sometimes it's like, all right, you're right, copy down what's on the board because we just need to get through some things.
Looking at the chat, I think all the participants are agreeing with us. It's a bit of both. Osama is, as you said, like it's science on the tougher days, and art in the good days. And I think in art in the tougher days as well. So you got to get creative on the tougher days as well. When your class is not on their best mood, I think you get really creative in those days. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would say based on the current movement seems to be going more towards science. Like even if you just think, of the speakers you mentioned, Jared Cooney-Howard, Swella, like they're all more on the scientific side, though Jared's, quite dynamic. Because it's like, he's telling you the science, but he's doing it in a very artistic way. I remember the first time I saw him speak, and it was like we walked into the lecture theatre and he was like leaning on a table and everyone's like, where's the speaker? He should be behind the lectern. And then that was him and he's like introducing himself and everyone's like, okay, this is not how you're meant to talk if you're one of the sciencey people.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right, beautiful, wonderful. Just lovely to hear what we think. And then obviously contextualizing this all in the sort of in the AI world, I think this matters now more than ever, because we're surrounded by AI. We're using AI. Our students are using AI. It's kind of become the open secret that's sort of everyone's doing, but no one's really talking about. And I know a lot of kind of AI researchers who are like, it's their job to go out and talk to teachers. How are you using AI? And the teachers will be like, oh, no, we're not at all. But then it's like, you get them talking and it's like, well, of course we are. We use it for this, we use it for emails, we use it for reports, we use it for comments, we use it for feedback, all these sort of things. But it's kind of like the sort of thing that we're not entirely comfortable talking about yet. So this is kind of my take on it, is that if we can bring science and art together, so that would be the ancient pedagogies, the modern pedagogies together in conversation through a democratic frame, even in the space of AI, then that's the goal. So if you want to hover the QR code and let me know if it doesn't work, because these QR codes are sort of, coming and going. Thank you, whoever did that for me. I still remember, 8 years ago putting QR codes on everything and everyone going, oh, who's going to do that? QR codes are silly. And then COVID happened, and then it's like, well, yeah, okay, now we all know about them. We use them all the time. But anyway, all right, so AI. I'm basically saying that if I'm a teacher, which I am, thanks, Zainab. I've taught many a Zainab, such a good name. Anyway, teaching in the age of AI, the stranger at the door. If I'm, and when I tend to talk to teachers, which I have the privilege to do often, I say to them, what's one social justice issue you're trying to introduce into your class, or all those kind of things. Like, teaching is just so political. If a female student and a male student raise their hand at the same time, when you make a choice, you're making a political decision. Who am I favoring? A student in the back row puts their hand up, student in the front row puts their hand up. Who do you go to first? And in what order? All those kind of things are political decisions. And so I think each of our choices in the classroom is sort of loaded with meaning and importance. And if and when we bring AI into the classroom, it's a potential to bring in ideas that we don't necessarily support. So I'll try to explain that to you. But as I said, I want you to tell me what's a belief or a misconception that you look to counter within your classroom. So it could be anything. It could be, you're trying to make all your students consider maybe being vegan, vegetarian is something worth considering. Animal rights. It could be LGBTQIA plus rights. It could be religion, atheism, whatever. Like, what's something that kind of you try and address in your classroom? It could be the kind of Andrew Tate sort of misogyny type thing, but again, I'm talking too much. What's one belief or misconception that you look to counter within your classroom? So something that you won't stand for, or you're trying to disagree with, or those kind of things. Maybe that's too hard a question.
Mm. Yeah, bullying. Yes, bullying is an important one. Toleration. Toleration to those whom are different to us. We don't need to believe the same things. Yeah, social justice issues. Yeah, I think bullying is a big one for me too. When you think about students usually do not understand what it looks like when they do it until it's happening to them. So I think that's my, I think that's my thing as well. But I'm quite blessed with some good students. Like, with respect, I've never witnessed such respect before. So it's been a great experience so far with my students. But I think when there's a disrespect, I think I can't stop myself dealing with it. What about you? What is your?
I've probably the kind of, I would love almost. I always find increasingly my students think that if we're having a discussion, that we're having a debate, and that someone has to win. And it would be like, whose team are we on, and I can't, all those kind of, I can't be in their group because they disagree with me. So I think it's sort of Taylor's got it like something similar, or Denise rather.
Yeah.
I saw Denise being able to understand diverse thinkers, sort of like, yeah, I don't know.
Accepting, I think opposing views is a very important skill to develop. But I feel like this generation, like with my students, what I witness is they are better at this than we were, I think.
Oh, really?
At their ages. I find them more tolerant in terms of accepting the differences, diversity. Maybe they are more exposed to it now. It could be that.
Well, you must be doing a good job. I tend to find the opposite. It's like I've always found you need to train them. It's sort of like they assume we're going to have a argument and someone will win. And it's like, no, we're just having a discussion. We're exploring, or the importance of literature. Yeah. And I can't do it. Well, that's a tricky one. Yeah. Environmental impact, everyone's critical involvement. Yeah. Okay. So basically what I'm saying is if there's a potential that if you're using AI in your classroom that it could be going against some of these very things. Pessimistic about everything around them. Yeah, again, like, AI at least will be always positive, even if it doesn't make sense. You can ask about the darkest topics and they'll give you a peppy answer. Yeah. But yeah, so kind of if that's, keep in mind sort of those are the things you're trying to push. AI is very likely to be doing the opposite of that just because it's based on old thinking. And we as teachers, value ourselves being informed, knowledgeable, and to be able to kind of know all the things that are happening in the world and how we can sort of filter those into the classroom. And so I'm going to, talk about AI sort of through a whole bunch of books that you can seek out. Marcella, love it. Sounds good. Fatima, gender-based collaboration. You've walked right into it. So this wonderful book, Caroline Criado Perez, and on the picture on the right, like we didn't have a female crash test dummy for many, many, many years. And it was just assumed that the male was the normal, the ordinary, the standard. And that's the kind of bias that is encoded into most of the world, but AI especially. And, it explores all these fascinating examples like women were a lot more likely to be injured on icy roads because the icy roads were like, they clear the snow off the road and put it all on the footpath, which meant that, at that time, stay-at-home mums and women pushing prams would then be on icy roads and slip over and be injured and yada, yada, yada. But those things were never picked up in the data sets. And so kind of, it's not just AI for this particular book, but the kind of data we collect, the famous space mission that sent, the female astronaut with 100 tampons for a short trip into space, all those kind of things where the male-dominated science world is sort of doing data wrong, I guess. Dr. Tamika Worrell is a PhD from, I think it's Monash, and she talks about how AI is harming Indigenous knowledges. And even just recently, I was at a conference in Sydney, and you do the classic Google search, whose land am I on? So you can do an acknowledgement, and Google now provides you a little AI summary. And some of the things that were captured in that AI summary are the sort of things you probably would not be wanting to say around our First Peoples in Australia. That they're semi-nomadic and everything's past tense and ancient knowledge and ancient wisdom without any representation of current knowledge and excellence that surrounds us. This great book, Why AI Undermines Democracy and What to Do About It, basically suggests that the core of democracy is that we should be able to, that fairness is sort of underpins everything that happens in democracy. And the more and more that AI is involved in decision making, including voting and, the Analytica sort of Facebook manipulation through AI of targeted ads and all those sort of things. You think of the recent yes, no voice to parliament vote and AI generated images of Indigenous looking faces saying that they thought that we should vote no, kind of thing. Like each of those, whether you agree with what happened or not, the kind of manipulation of the democratic process by AI is a bit of a worry. This is out of America. A man was falsely arrested based on AI manipulation of faces, and as we know, AI is based on the data sets that it has available, primarily based on Caucasian faces, and so it's not very good at African faces and so forth. If you think of what happened in the robo-debt scandal, it's kind of unclear. Some people say it was an AI system, some people say it wasn't, but basically, people were getting lumped with big chunks of debt falsely and incorrectly based on, a very, very rough algorithm. I was at an AI presenting on a panel at an AI conference recently, and maybe Kevs, maybe one of your colleagues from Haileybury, but I could be getting my schools mixed up, was saying like, if you type in doctor, these are the kind of images that it generates.
That happened to me even once. I was generating an image myself as an economics teacher. The first image was a white woman with blonde hair, with glasses. And once I said that I was wearing a scarf, it changed the story. It looked like, so it didn't look as empowering as the first image.
Oh, how do you mean? What happened?
So, for example, from the computers and the data around me, it turned into books that are old books in front of me. My skin color changed. The students surrounding me became Muslim-looking students. So, and the environment looked like an older school environment. So that was a strange experience.
Yeah. Wow, what a great illustration. Like, yeah. So, you'd be saying, we need women in STEM, we need women in maths, we need women in this, and then you're like, oh, I'm in a rush, I'll get a doctor picture for my slides or whatever, and then AI will say, oh, here you go. And as you say, even if you adapt it, it passes on all these sort of hidden biases. I can't even imagine what it would do if you said an Aboriginal economics teacher or something. They'd be guaranteed they'd be in front of some red dirt or something somewhere. And so one of, I believe your colleagues, but it could have been a different school down the road, was saying, and if you type in female doctor, it kind of breaks. And someone in the back row of the conference leaned to their friend and said, oh, well, that's just the truth. And it's like, oof, that's, so it's not all AI we've got to fix. Let's just say that. The other thing I know, for a lot of us, having ChatGPT open on another tab at the end of your browser is what we do. But I think increasingly we've got to think about what kind of data we might be putting in there. Like if you say, because it might not mean too much to us to say, young Jamal got a 2 out of 100 on their test. Well, I'll just put that in there and get it to write me a comment. But Jamal might feel a bit different about that if he knew that his data was being put kind of into this system that we're not really sure what happens to the data that goes on there. Very likely it's being used to inform future data sets. If you think of, you get a sensitive email from a parent saying, hey, my kid is anxious, depressed, whatever it is, and then, you say, oh, I don't know how to respond to that, I'll put it in ChatGPT. Then again, names and dates and times and all sorts of things are being fed into the system that maybe we should be wary about. I don't know. I'm always conscious of that myself when it's like, oh, there's this thing that I'm working on. I'm writing an article or a paper or I've got some data sitting there and I go, oh, I'll just put it in ChatGPT and then think, oh, what could happen to that? Has everything I've written just been used to inform some future piece of AI generated art or writing or whatever it is? Another wonderful book, Teaching the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is another way of sort of looking at it. They're all Global Teacher Prize winners, so from all across the world, not Australia, of course. And that was a really good read. Again, all these books will be at the end if you want to do that. All right, but again, now we're going to move into sort of I won't call it a instructional model because I've just said that, those are too common and they're everywhere and whatever. But basically, this is this is the summary of what started as, this a presentation, me presenting to teachers about like, hey, maybe we could mix modern with ancient approaches, is now a paper that you can read and it's free, which is uncommon for research. So here's my thinking. Here's my model. I'm not a maths person, but it's technically an algorithm. I think our classes should be accessible, they should be relevant, they should be efficient, and then that will allow us to make them democratic. So this is a mixture of ancient and modern, and this is sort of just the high level overview. And then I'll explore a whole bunch of different strategies and techniques that I found really useful. So in terms of accessibility, I'll talk to you about instructional video, which, as Kev said, there's like 650 videos of me teaching various things to various students, because way back in 2016, I had two classes the same, two Year 9 poetry classes. It wasn't a poetry class, that sounds lovely, but they were learning poetry at this point, and I made this really complicated PowerPoint, just like the one where I'm talking to you from now, about all of the different poetic techniques that they needed to be aware of. And I delivered that in the morning, then I delivered it in the afternoon to a different class, and then the next day I'd do it again, and then I'd do it again, and I'd do it again until they got it. And then I thought, wow, I could do that PowerPoint in my sleep, I could read it out, I could do all those sort of things. And it wasn't really a common thing back then, but I got my old Department of Education laptop, which, when you turned it on, sounded like a helicopter was about to take off. And the webcam looked like someone had put Vaseline on it. It was that old and out of date. I think that old video is now hidden, but that was my first ever video. And I set it for my students, and I said, you can watch it on the bus on the way home on YouTube, and then the next day just take some notes, and then we don't have to go through the PowerPoint, because my Year 9s were like, can you stop talking to us from a PowerPoint, you're killing us kind of thing, it takes forever. And they'd say, no, stop on each slide. We need to write down every single thing that's on the slide and every single thing you said. And so it took hours and hours and hours. So then I made it a short video, edited it, cut out every time I said which was every 3 seconds. And then after that, I never again taught that same PowerPoint. So that sort of changed my life in many ways, in that I didn't have to be that teacher who does the same PowerPoint every year. But also opened up all these other possibilities, which sort of are informed by what's here. Assistive technology is a big one, and I'll have a whole bunch of different tools for that. But and generative artificial intelligence, which you might be like, but you just were bad mouthing it and talking about the risks. But I think we can bring it into our class with the risks, but also the positives as well. So instructional video, there's lots out there, and I'll pull up some examples in a sec. Inclusive technologies, again, I think what you're looking for is universal design for learning type stuff, which means that if it works for me, it'll work for a student with dyslexia, with hearing impairments, with sight impairments, all those sort of things. And again, these have come leaps and bounds. When I started doing this, it would be like, you'd have to find this program that costs $600 that would read out the text on the screen, and now it's like on everyone's iPhone, and we can all do it practically for free. Gen AI, again, I would be bringing, typically I like to think of it as a triangle. You've got the teacher, you've got the learner, and you've got Gen AI as sort of a third touch point. I would rather that be the triangle rather than have students just accessing AI all by themselves. An easy example for me as a English teacher would be, rather than start with the feedback I'd generated, I'd say, let's look at your story that you've written. We'll ask AI to give you feedback in Word or in ChatGPT or whatever it was at the time. And then ChatGPT would give some fairly inane and not very useful feedback. The student would say, that's silly. I would say, that's silly. And then they would say, what I would say is blah, 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 blah. And then I'd write that down and go, oh, that's actually pretty good. But by having kind of AI in that triangle, they're empowered to say, this is my writing and I did that on purpose, or here's what I chose and here's why I chose it. And it's kind of like introducing a sort of non-human element that can very easily be sort of put aside when necessary. So that's how I ideally would be using it. I think our classrooms increasingly should be relevant and current. Like if you just think of the wild west of the internet and what our students are being exposed to every day, all sorts of radicalizing topics and things. I think it's beholden on us as teachers to bring that safely in the classroom wherever we can. So a lot of that's through discussion, but like if I have a student who's racist or misogynist or whatever it is, I would rather them air that out and get their peer response from that in a classroom rather than not. So as a result, we're talking lots of YouTube clips of people talking about things, just to sort of bring other voices in. I think too often in classes there's a lot of teacher talk, not a lot of student talk, and definitely no talk from outside. So short little YouTube clips just to change the sort of focus, I guess. And TikToks, which again is, people are like, oh, TikTok's a mess. And what I used to do is you basically email the TikTok to yourself, download it, and then it'd be off the app. You wouldn't have any of the weird suggestions or search functions or any of the social aspects, and you just show them a short, 30-second clip that's usually someone explaining a concept really quickly. Anyway, these are all examples of sort of teachers on TikTok who've gone semi-famous, and that's sort of their thing, which is interesting in and of itself. I've got references here. Wow, look at me go. I think it should be efficient. So that's probably where you think of your cognitive load theory type approaches. So for me, it's flipped learning, retrieval practice, and method of loci, depending on how you like to pronounce it. And again, I'll explain each of these sort of in turn in more detail. But as I said, flipped learning, I made my first video, which meant that they could do some of the boring work that was just me talking at them and them listening at home, which then meant all of a sudden we had all this extra time that we could do interesting stuff, like have discussions, actually leave the classroom and do kind of practical application tasks. So whereas the first time I taught the super long PowerPoint, most of the learning was just learning the stuff. Following from that, they were actually then to start to apply it and be able to recognize these techniques and those sort of things. Retrieval practice, again, I've got hundreds of examples, depending on time that we could get to. But that's basically getting students to pause, look at a blank piece of paper usually, and do that, and basically look up and to the right and start to think of, what they did recently, what they've learnt recently, all those sort of things. And something we all do as adults, which is at the end of the day, you think, what happened today? That's retrieval practice. You're looking up and going, what did I even get up to? Method of loci and embodied memory is basically retrieval practice on steroids. So the first Australians, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, are the case in point on this. They've sort of got traditions from hundreds of thousands of years old that have been passed down orally. The way that you do that is that you map things that you know to places and objects, and that's something that I just don't see happening enough in schools themselves. Too often our students are just sitting in white-walled classrooms, at least this for me as a high school teacher, white-walled classrooms under fluorescent lights with no posters on the wall, and you're just expecting them to just somehow attach their knowledge and their new memories to, that's kind of like a sliding screen of just boring same old images. And if you've ever kind of like gone walking and stopped at a certain point on your walk and remembered something that you remembered last time you were there, a smell, a song, a thought, an idea, that's kind of like what method of loci is all about. And if you're, a VCE or HSC teacher at the upper ends of schooling, this is the kind of thing that I would be really, really focusing on, to the point that my year 11s and year 12s, we would go and set up chairs in the gym where they would sit the exam, and we would get them to map connections between things in that exam room and the things that they needed to remember for the exam. So that's obviously not something you can always do if they're doing their exams off-site rather. But I think a lot of us, we know where the exam's going to be. It's going to be in the gym. They're going to be lined up. They could probably even tell you what seat they're going to be sitting in. So all those things are kind of possible things that we could be leveraging, I think. And then democratic is sort of fairly broad of an approach. And for me, that's mostly talking about the kind of Socratic method, Socratic circles, and a Socratic approach, which is basically asking questions and getting the students to actually do the thinking and the driving the discussion, which I feel like I'm, surrounded by like-minded people based on the thoughts in the chat so far. So that's kind of the broad, big picture. That's the keynote. That's the big picture ideas. And then from here, it's just kind of, here's different ways that I've been doing that. And again, this isn't like the high theories out of the way. This is like things that I have done and have refined over many years. So, and of course, the challenge, like, if you think of all of the things that I've just run through, I feel like each one of these things by itself could be like a career commitment. That could be your thing. You could go and I'm going to be the instructional video teacher or the flip learning teacher, and that could maintain your whole career, your whole interest, but I found the greatest benefit when I started to chop and change and combine these things together, because one thing allows you to do more of another, which allows you to do more of another, and it sort of moves on and on that way. Which reminds me, and just the impetus for this whole idea came when the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030, basically it's like kind of like the Global Teacher Prize. Anytime you are successful as a teacher, they put you in front of like people with a camera who don't know anything about teaching, and you have to try and explain, here's how I teach. And so I was like, I don't know, what do I do? And I was like, I don't know, ancient and modern. And then they were nodding like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. And I was like, it doesn't to me, but anyway, now it does. But yeah, that's kind of, you sort of need, when you're talking to non-teachers, you need to kind of simplify and dumb it down. So that's sort of two very broad topics. And this is where I'm going to ask you again. I've always found that in teaching, it's not like you're just getting better and better each day. It tends, for me, from my experience at least, to sort of go in quantum leaps. You have a discovery, you take a new approach, and then things improve. And I think when I made these slides originally, like most of the examples of technology, but I was reflecting this morning, and my first job as a teacher, I think I went from high school to university to teaching. So I had some students that were not that dissimilar to me in age, and I was, more of a student than a teacher when I first started. And my first quantum leap was that when I first started, I thought I'll hang out with the old teachers. They'll know the most about things. They'll be able to teach me stuff. And so as a result, the bell would go and we'd all sit there talking because they've been around, they've done it forever. And then eventually that would all slope off to class, slowly walking, we've done this forever. Until someone was like, oh, you've been coming late to your classes. And I was like, oh, I'm not late. I leave when everyone else leaves, kind of thing. And so my first quantum leap was like, oh, if you come 5 minutes early to class, and again, this is me in my first, 2 weeks of school of teaching. You come 5 minutes early, you can welcome the kids into the class. You're like, oh, do you mind just moving that chair around? Here's what we're learning. Do you want to help me hand these sheets out? All of those things, and that one practice of coming 5 minutes earlier, or if it's really bad, 15 minutes early. We've all had that class where it's like you're almost there before the last one's left. To me, that's like a very easy example of a quantum leap. Once I started coming early, everything became way easier. But again, that I was just going with the flow. All the old teachers just left whenever. All right. And again, I'm still holding it now. And maybe this is showing my age, but I remember, teaching a lot by PowerPoint. You'd run to the back of the class and you go, okay, so this is the example. And then you'd run to the front because it had to be plugged into the screen. And then you'd have to go to the next slide, and then you'd run to the back of the class so you could keep an eye on the class. But once I got a clicker, I was like, oh, I can be like sitting with students, beside students, at the back of the room, wherever. Same thing, portable. And then, of course, when we got a wireless mouse, and then when we got, cord-free connecting to things, I was like, oh, my God. And the last one there is just like a screen reader. So up until then, I read everything off the page. And now I barely look at words on a page anymore because it's like, well, why would you when you can get it read to you? So I want to ask you, here are some other examples to get you warmed up. I'll be asking you if you can reflect back and think of a quantum leap, what a quantum leap was for you. It can be something stupid and embarrassing, like showing up to class early rather than late because you're copying everyone else. For me, when I started to focus on learning rather than teaching, that made a big difference. Like I just thought, if I could be even more funny, even more, out there and memorable, my teaching, they'd just remember it. I'd never asked them what I talked about the day before, but if I was just really interesting, they'd remember, but then shifting to a focus of them actually doing those steps of getting them to, note down what they'd done. Peer assessment was good. One year, I almost got in trouble because my students were so convinced that they were marking their own assignments that they complained and said, he's not marking our assignments, because I had them using the rubric and I explained how we did it. I had them write their own rubrics, doing all those sort of good things. And then they thought, oh, he's really not marking our work. But I'd look at their marks and go, oh, not really. And then I'd mark it properly. But to help them really understand the assessment process, as I talked about already, first time I did a screen recording and started doing my videos, that changed my life. There was 1 year that I taught a select entry class. We gamified the whole lesson, so it was like Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings, all that sort of stuff. It was in tribes and teams, and there were games and all those sort of things. That really made me focus on, like, how could I make each lesson engaging and interesting and have a narrative and a story. I ultimately abandoned it because what I found was, for high achieving kids, they knew sort of intuitively, in art, I'm the third best student. In maths, I'm the first student. In PE, I'm the 24th. And then I said, well, now in this class, we're valuing creativity and critical thinking and, being willing to help your team and collaboration. And then they were like, whoa, this... Now there's a new system we have to rank ourselves on. They all got very anxious and concerned, and anyway, but it definitely informed the approach I take to my teaching. But over to you, and Kevza, if you want to get us started, that'd be fun. Can you think of a quantum leap that you've experienced where you sort of, like, from that day forward, things were better or different or changed?
I think my biggest and first one was establishing those close relationships with the students, establishing trust, made teaching a lot easier, because once they trust you, I think you get them on your side and you can develop that growth mindset. You can motivate them better. I think that establishing good relationships is a very important turning point in my teaching. And one of the things that I think made a big difference is teaching students about learning, about thinking, metacognition. I think that is a big win for my classrooms. So I tried flipped learning, and I wanted to ask you, since you started talking about flipped learning, how did you deal with students who didn't do the work that they have to do at home? Because that was my biggest problem with flipped learning. So the high-end students, like above average, would do the learning at home, but I would always have a handful of students that didn't watch the videos or didn't revise the content that I asked them to. So how did you go ahead with them, engage them?
Well, the short answer is the same way you work with any other homework, which is, you follow the process of the school. But the main thing is, the goal of flipped learning is that the classroom is more interesting if you've done the work. So, like, it'd be, okay, go off and watch this video and write notes on this article or whatever it is, and then we'll have like a Socratic circle. So they'd come into the room and there'd be two circles having a discussion, and then it's like, as they come in, you check off their work. My wife famously would, like, not let the students into the class until they'd done it. So you'd walk past her class and there'd be all these kids on the floor, like, laying down, doing their work, while the other kids were inside doing the sort of fun application task. Like in a science class, it might be like, we're doing an experiment based on what you read. And, there's a couple, 4 or 5 kids in the back row just doing the homework while everyone else is, making elephant toothpaste or whatever it is. But yeah, that was always my way. So kind of the carrot was that we'll be doing something interesting, and the stick was just the same old stick, homework, policy, detention, stay behind, blah, 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 all the boring stuff. But I wouldn't say I ever did a very strict flipped learning approach. Like the standard model is like all the teaching happens off-site and all the fun stuff happens in class, but I just didn't find that to be achievable. Like, there are some people who do it, but not for me.
Yes. Yeah, great. The cat is going really good. So, and I think this is really important, right? Yeah, I'm admitting to students my mistakes. So we are human too. We can make mistakes. I think making mistakes and normal in the classroom. I think that's a big game changer. We've got humor. Definitely, they love a humorous and fun teacher, don't they?
Mm. I really like the being more relevant, talking about Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande.
No, and
The
Zora
problem is, Sarah,
Hocam.
you've got to keep up, and then there's always someone new. Oh.
Yeah, Zora Hocam, you are a classic. So you're amazing. Well done. Mm.
And radio, I like that one. Yeah, to err is human, admitting mistakes. Wonderful.
Yes, no, Hocam. It's the learning our goal, not the teaching. Amazing. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, Farida, mine was always I had to control my sense of humor because I'd be like, the class is being noisy again. Oh, I made a joke, and then they're all off. So I had to be like, is now a good time for humor? Yes or no? And try and manage it because otherwise I make my own life hard sometimes. Yeah, getting those students in the class and identify them by name. Yeah, my goal was always like lesson 1, by the time they've left, I should have memorized them. And people are always like, oh, but what did they learn in the first lesson? Oh, almost nothing. But that's when they're quiet and, placid normally. So you can just be the one modeling. I'm trying to memorize your names and learn everything. Being an older teacher, learning to get down to their level and being more approachable. Yeah, great. Wonderful. All right, exciting. That's
Amazing.
the kind
Well done,
of thing
people.
that gets
It's
me
amazing.
excited. Just kind of because I feel like we've all got these reflections and thoughts, and it's not often that we actually get time to think about it. Oh, allowing students to be the teachers. I like that. I like it.
Switching roles.
There was a time when I used to get my students to make YouTube videos as well, which was a funny and interesting one. They were making podcasts before they were cool. Oh yeah, okay, that's good.
Amazing.
All right, let's move on. I want to give you a bit of some stuff to take away. So what do we got? 45 minutes. Heaps of time. I hope. All right. So again, it's a bit silly to group some things as ancient, some things as modern. But again, I was explaining it to a non-teacher audience, and made that simplification. So one thing I think that we need to do better is revision as an ongoing practice. And again, this might just be my setting and where I taught and all those sort of things. But as Kevza was saying, teaching students how they learn, and even the simple model of the brain that Swala would have talked to you about, short-term memory, long-term memory. And, the short-term memory is like the workbench of the brain, all those kind of things. Even though it's maybe not the most nuanced understanding, explaining that to students is like such a game changer. Because I always found, it'd be our VCE students would get someone who'd come in with like a DJ and someone in baggy pants with a microphone. They'd be like, we're going to teach you how to do study skills. And it's like, they're in year 12. Why has no one talked to them about how to study until then? Make a study timetable. What? Why don't we do that earlier? Anyway. And so retrieval practice, again, I've spoken about that before, but these are both wonderful books. Powerful Teaching, probably, I would say, is one of the books that really changed my teaching approach overall. And it's one of the rare books where you just will make it stick. That's a good book too. Yeah. The Elephant and the Monkey, that's another, I think that's from that book, Make It Stick. Powerful Teaching is the kind of thing that at the end of every chapter, you're like, oh, I'm doing that tomorrow. And each time you do it, you're like, yeah, that was worth doing. And then more and more, it will become more of your regular routine practice. Because, they're all cheap, they're all free. It's not like make a 100 question Kahoot that takes you all night and you're up all night doing it. It's the kind of thing that you can just do really easily. So this is from 2022, so a little while ago now, but I was teaching English language, which is sort of linguistics for high school students. And so every lesson, each one of those boxes on the left is, we do 10 questions each lesson. I would have my phone in my hand. I'd have what we were using back then, OneNote. I'd open OneNote and I'd be doing what I said we often do at the end of the day. I'd be going, oh, what did we learn last lesson? And I'd go, oh, I don't know, what is a prefix? What is a suffix? And I'd only ever do the left-hand column. So I'd just be, as I'm walking, holding my books and my bags and, texters and all those sort of things and water bottle, I'm typing into my phone, and as I arrive early and set up the chairs and things, adding in questions. As the kids come in early, I'm saying, hey, what did we do last lesson? And they're going blah, 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 blah. And I'm typing it into the questions, all very not organized, not super prepared, not kind of nothing really complicated, just the kind of thing that we can do really easily. And then, of course, the first thing we would do, I'd say, all right, kids, write out 1 to 10 in your book. And I'd ask them those questions. I get them to stay silent first, and then we go through all of our answers. And again, I won't be able to pull up the name because the chat's far too busy. But the person who said making the students the teachers, I would say, all right, question 1, what is high-rising terminal? And then I'd say, can someone tell me? And someone would yell out the wrong answer, and the other kid would turn to them and go, no, you're close, but it's actually this and not that. And I'm just sitting there pretending all I have to do is type up what they decide. And then that's basically how I manage retrieval in a sort of technological way. But same thing, you could just, as they come in, turn to the back of your book, write down everything you learnt, give them a post-it. There's 100 different ways to do it, but it's basically, you're not structuring it, you're not scaffolding it, you're not doing any of that stuff. You're just saying you have the knowledge in your head. Your job is to pull the knowledge out and put it on a page. And sort of metaphorically, we like to explain it to students as you're in one of those scary kind of horror movie cornfields. Each time you kind of push through the corn, push through the grass, whatever it is, you make a pathway in your brain. The more times you do it, the easier it will be to access when you're in a test, an exam, or just in life. So that's kind of how we explain it. And then normally at the end of a unit, I would do a tournament recall, which is basically they all get a blank piece of paper and their only job is to write down everything that they know. In an English class, that was quotes, typically. Quotes, examples, historical facts. For science, it could be, all sorts of things. Elements, could be formula for maths, could be anything like that. Basically as open as you want. They're competing against one another. At the end of, say, you normally start with 8 minutes, then break it down to 5, and then 2, you sort of shorten the time each time because they're doing it more than once, so no one gets knocked out and stops. But for example, Connor and Polly, at the end they would swap papers, and so then they're looking at each other's answers because ostensibly they're ticking off if they're true or if they've just written nonsense, but as they're doing that, they're learning more. So then, as you can see, if we follow Polly and Connor along, Polly went from 20 to 18 with 3 less minutes, so it's she's getting more and more practice and repeating the same pathway in her brain more and more and more. And then by the time you get down to the last group, you get them to get a whiteboard marker, come up to the board and do it live. And at that point, everyone's cheering them on and copying them. And, but basically it's a fun way to make what is otherwise quite by definition repetitive, make it fun and interesting rather. And then at the end, you've got these, whilst messily written, quite detailed sheets of facts that you can then use for exam revision, test revision, or whatever it is, or you can just show it to the future, to the next round of kids and show them the sort of knowledge that they learn. Method of loci or loci, depending on who you ask. And again, that QR code, I think, takes you to the conversation article about how oral cultures memorize so much information. So the literature is a little bit divided. Method of loci is basically where you go and walk it or you go and do it. And mind palace is when you just do it in your head, essentially, to sort of make it simple for you. So in an exam setting, method of loci won't work because obviously they can't just get up and go walk down their street or whatever it is. And again, I'm not a big TV watcher, but apparently in Sherlock and Hannibal, there's kind of visual representations of what this looks like. So what we used to do at my school, or I used to do specifically, this was a map of our school. and you would say to the students, okay, you've got your piece of paper, like what we've got here. This has got all your facts on it that you need to remember, your information. And I'd say, okay, your job is to map it to the school. Another way we do it typically is, you do your bedroom or a room well, your kitchen, your family home, something like that. So it's like you're working with something that is already in your brain. It's already mapped in there. You never open the bathroom thinking it's the toilet or vice versa. So your brain intuitively understands your house inside and out. It knows where you leave your phone, where you leave your keys. All those things are already in there. And so you're just adding another layer on top of that. And by combining multiple pathways, you're going to improve your ability to recall that information. Anytime you've seen any one of those memory athletes, people memorize pi or, a deck of cards or whatever, this is the method that they're using, among others. So for my year 11s, these were the books we were studying. We'd go and take pictures, and then again, this is from years and years ago, but I already know that this is going to be a Macbeth quote about hands being clean or unclean, the connection being, the mops and the brushes. Oh, no, there you go, I'm wrong. All great Neptune, wash this blood clean from my hands, not the exact word I was thinking. Gattaca, there's no gene for fate. F8 was like the clever thing. So there you go. Very funny. Again, if I showed this image to my students in that year, we would do this regularly and they would map it to their own memory and do their own as well. But again, different quotes to help them memorize. This, I think, is the textiles room, and the pun being jeans as in Jean rather than jeans. But, just as some sort of stupid examples that the kids found funny and that were therefore memorable. But as Kevza was saying, you also kind of want them to practice and learn more about themselves. So these are different approaches that we can use. So, we used to make songs. So for some students, like you'd say, okay, we need to memorize this Macbeth quote that has a bit of a rhyme to it. And some students will be like, yep, straight away. Denise says mapping text with visuals is a very, very powerful technique. So Denise, at least, is a fan of imagery. Some people's brains are just wired in certain ways. Like I think, my two very young sons, for whatever reason, have always been, my wife sings and they say, stop singing. So in our house, they're not going to be good at memorizing with songs. It's just not going to be a thing because they're not big singers. But again, some students, they'd be, kids would be like playing us Who Let the Dogs Out and saying how that maps to the thing they have to remember. And the rest of the class is going, I don't hear, I don't see what you mean. Acronyms for some students are really, really powerful. And obviously for some subjects like science, it's really, really important for some students. And it's kind of not something you tend to tell them to do, but some students just love writing out quotes hundreds of times. They write it, then they flip it, try and write it again word for word and flip it. It's kind of, the science doesn't necessarily support it, but if some students feel really confident and powerful doing that, then that's great. Radia says imagery and songs work well with learning support students. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it's kind of, again, you're trying to build on whatever strengths they already have. So learning support students in this case, probably, if they need help with their reading and writing, they probably are sort of compensating in other ways. So they're much better at analyzing imagery or song or sound or audio. So anytime you can sort of make those leaps for them, the better. Gevza, talk to us. A haiku for the content covered. That sounds hard.
Yeah, I learned this from a program that I attended. I was a master teacher for English, so I learned about haiku from him. And then I asked my students to write haikus in economics context, and that came up with great haikus. So I think that works, like writing poems, raps, songs. I think makes the work a bit more engaging. In economics could be very dry. So it's a fun way, I guess.
Yeah, nice. Beautiful. The internet, aren't they pushing knowledge out of memory and into the ether? Google, so okay, wait, well, that's a tricky one. Let me see. AI, the internet, are they pushing knowledge out of memory into the ether? Google search AI. Yeah, yeah. Like, there are people in the world who would say, well, you never need to memorize anything anymore. And even I'm sure many of us do that in our house. You're joking with your wife or your partner or your kids, and then you say, oh, what's the name of that thing? And you say, hey Google, or hey Alexa, or hey whatever, and it just tells you. But at least the way that schools are set up at the moment, like there's always going to be some sort of exam. There's always going to be some sort of thing where they need to do it. But yeah, so I would say even more than ever, these skills are important because potentially they've never memorized anything in their life. Like, do students still learn the multiplication table? I'm not sure. Not always. I'm sure there's hundreds of people who couldn't. You even hear stories of like students who can't read an analog clock anymore. So like, there's some real things that us oldies think are like, of course, how could you not? But some of those things might need teaching. Another one is narrative, like you sort of make a little story of how it works. Like that's history is a really good one for that. Queen Victoria walks into the room and Adolf Hitler says blah blah blah, and then Franz Ferdinand says all those kind of narrative things, imagery, drawing pictures, turning things into those kind of things, and obviously memory palace, method of loci, and retrieval practice. But I tend to focus on 6 just because I know that if I don't do it, it's like no one else is going to do it. That acronyms are going to come up in, like, if they're doing any biology stuff, they'll be doing it. Economics, certainly. Songs, like song 1 and 6, songs and retrieve and memory palace stuff, very rare. And there was a point when I got too excited and started making songs for students. But that's actually not really best practice, except for the fact that, they thought it was funny because I can't sing, and I was trying to rap sort of thing to put, various quotes to a song, which was ultimately a failed experiment because the whole point is that they need to make the connections in their head, not me make the connections in my head. But I did have some students make their own songs, and turned out they could play the piano and the guitar and were much more skilled musically than me. But as lots of people in the chat have already said, the kind of making mistakes is sort of part of what it is to be a teacher, I think. This is probably too wordy and academic, but there's these are the broad categories of different ways you could do it. Verbal, physical, visual, spatial, linguistic, physical being the weirdest one. So a number of times I take my students to the dance room, which was very much out of my comfort zone. I don't dance and I don't sing. And we stood in front of the big full mirrors, and we learnt a particular series of dance movements. Well, not we learnt them. They came up with the movements to make their own associations. But again, that's like, again, not, I wasn't competing with anyone else to go to the dance theatre so that we could memorize concepts to movement. But for some students, especially those more physically and dance able, it was like it really helped make those pathways. Physical sensation, there's all this theoretically, you could attach memories to being very cold or very hot, then when they're in an exam, doing, when it's very cold or very hot, depending on when the exams are, maybe hot, that would potentially trigger their memory. But again, that's like, I don't know. I don't know how realistic that is. But in theory, that's possible. So if you ever wanted to, have them memorize things by dumping water on their head or putting their hand in a bucket of ice or something, you could. What is Nuran Hokam? What's that? Okay, help me out. I'm Googling it. I don't know what it is. That's a person?
Nuran is the teacher who wrote the comment. So in Amity College, there is usually an attachment next to names of teachers. Nuran Hocam. Hocam means like teacher in Turkish, like my colleague. Yeah.
Wonderful. Failed experiments make good, if not the best teachers. That's true. the more I'm talking, I'm like, man, most of my examples are like, here's what I did and here's why it didn't work. But anyway, you can try it. Again, these are all really good books on kind of bringing ancient, mostly First Nations Australian or Indigenous cultures from across the world into your teaching, and sort of that inform all of these things. I'm pulling in the research and other points as well. Just as an interesting aside, there's virtual reality goggles. People are doing mind palaces that aren't just in the mind but are in the eyes, and anyway, it's kind of complicated to explain, but it works just as well. Well, not just as well, but it works as it also works. Obviously, it's much better if you can do it with the five senses and be tasting and smelling and whatever. Just some general principles that I feel like are important to write down. As I've already explained, students need to make their own. The more visceral, crude, and lewd, the more memorable, which probably doesn't work in, our settings working with young kids. But like if anyone's been through any medical training, all of the acronyms that they use to memorize the bones and the limbs are all end in like some gruesome or sexual joke. That's what the research says, so that's why I'm telling you, rather than expecting you to do it. I couldn't really work that out myself, how to engage with that one. But as much as possible, you'd want to be using more than one technique with the students, and you want to illustrate to students different strategies, which will be more or less effective depending on who they are and their upbringing. And then, as always, revise 1 day later, 1 week, or 1 month. And I'm imagining John Sweller probably showed the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which is like, the big drop off of memorizing things. But that's a bit difficult to operationalize. So we just say 1 day later, 1 week later, and 1 month later, because that's much easier to memorize, pardon me. But if I go all the way back, the important thing from my example a long time ago is this one. For the lessons where I didn't have much that we learnt last lesson, like we just, let's say they spent a whole lesson doing a practice task and we didn't learn anything new, that automatically set me up to go, well, let me just look up above and pull out some questions that we did a day ago, a week ago, or a month ago. So it's kind of like if you set up the system properly, you're sort of meeting all of the expectations of memorizing content without trying very hard. So sort of if you set up a good system, it'll sort of work for you, kind of thing.
We have a question. Would you like me to read that
please.
for you? So this is from an anonymous attendee. Challenging ingrained biases about race, gender, and equality that students have is one of the issues that I feel responsible for as a teacher. Considering that students use AI to help them with their studies, which also holds the same biases in more subtle ways, how can we equip students with the tools to be aware of these biases? I think this is a really important one.
Oh, and it's a tough one too. Well, the next section is all about discussion and getting students talking to one another, which might not necessarily work if they're writing, submitting sort of AI blindly. So I feel like when students submit AI produced content, the first thought is, I'll take this to someone else and we'll get them in trouble, essentially, I'll run it through some system that'll tell me what percentage was copied or those sort of things. I would much rather bring it into class and say, like when I'm giving feedback on an assessment task and we're looking at who got what scores, and well, I would always do that anonymously. But anyway, when we're looking at the examples, I would always include some what to my eyes would be very clear AI examples. And I'd be saying to the students, what do you notice about this? And kind of airing it out. I think anytime I would never want a student to spend a whole year learning with me and then those things never be aired, to just sort of be ignored. And I think if AI is the one doing that, then that's a really good opportunity to air that out. So if there's something especially offensive, I would be wanting to bring that into class and have a discussion about it. And, because it's easy to pull out their preconceived biases, orally, But as soon as they write it into a document, I feel like our instinct is to go, well, that's written and that's done, and so we can't bring that into the class. But I'd always be looking to bring good examples and bad examples of writing in to get the class to talk about what was good about it or not, I guess. Yeah. And then I see there's another question, but we might just... Oh, I'm not going to do that, actually. Just a chance for you to tell, because that's already what's been happening, which is wonderful to see. What techniques have you had success using to recall key information or quotes? So this can be you, yourself. It can be you teaching your students. Just any combination of techniques that we've talked about or others that I haven't considered. Chuck them in the chat, and that'd be interesting to share, because until I was here, I've never thought about doing a haiku for anything, let alone to remember economics. So that's one I'm taking away with me from today.
That's amazing. Another thing that I do, I think that I learned it from my colleague here. So we use walking, like we use learning walls, sorry. So we put all the information on the wall in an organized way. We get the students to walk and have a discussion in front of each content that they read, and then come back, and I ask them to write down what they remember, and then we have stations. Every student comes and adds to that information, and displaying that sort of thing helps them to, I know, like visually, as well as some retrieval practice as well. I think that helps them to remember key knowledge. That's one thing that I benefited for VCE preparation this year. Short 1% word quizzes, yes, short quizzes, definitely. Kahoots are very helpful, Blue Kits, like that kind of things that we can have data as a result as well, that I find them very useful and engaging and fun.
Same. Yeah, the only problem I find is that a lot of my time, not much of their time, you know what I mean? maybe that's just me. I'd be like, I've been up from, kids have gone to bed and I spent 2 hours making this Kahoot, and then it lasts for like 5 minutes in class, and I'm like, I spent hours on it.
Yeah, it takes a long time to create. I sometimes get students to create the Kahoots too. That's helpful. So they create questions and then write it down. So that's another way that I used in the past. Questions are not usually the best, but at least they create them.
That's true. And their non-examples are always terrible, but that's all right.
Nancy, I love the idea of Amazing Race.
Yeah.
Students usually love it, very engaging.
Ryan says, who can remind me of what we covered last lesson? Yeah, nice. Yeah, because you sort of need them to sort of say what they learned, and then you can be the one to add on the terminology that you use to describe it and those sort of things.
Mind maps, definitely.
Students
too. Mnemonics, yes, mnemonics are a good one.
Yeah, I feel like, as Sabra said, I'm sure we all have things that we learned in school that are still in there, If pressed, that's how it comes out in a mnemonic or whatever it is.
Yes, storytelling is a good one too. I use storytelling for particular things about like particular government policy, budget. So we write stories. Some students add images to the stories. It's I think helpful to narrate that boring information sometimes. Escape room, yep.
Yeah.
GimKit, definitely. They love that competition.
I'm not familiar with GimKit. I got to try that out.
GimKit is very much like BlueKit, but it's like a Super Mario kind of thing. The true answers they get is their energy to move through.
Oh, okay. I feel like it's like Kahoot and then BlueKit. It's like they've made it a game and then even more of a game and even more of a game to the point. It almost becomes problematic because the kids are like, oh, can't we just be doing, a BlueKit or whatever? They get really hooked.
I use board games too. Like yesterday was our last class with my BizMan students. We did a marshmallow challenge. We played with Legos to talk about management styles, to build a bridge together with different styles. So that was a fun one too.
Yeah, cool.
Soccer goal charts. That's a good one.
If they reach 100 points, they get an extra prize and reward. Sounds good. Yeah.
You're amazing, people. Well done.
Yeah, cool. Just don't run out of prizes. That's the other thing. All right, looking at the time, we'll probably only do ancient today, which is good because all the modern stuff is tech focused, and that's often it's like there's a higher barrier of entry, I guess. Whereas all this ancient stuff you should be able to do for free without any tech skills. All right, Marcella says infographics of keywords and simple phrases are displayed on the wall. Yeah, like an anchor chart. That's great. Yeah, beautiful. Okay. All right, Socratic Circle. So this is, I've got to give all credit to my wife who started us off down this train. And Matt Copeland he wrote the book on how to do it in classrooms. Obviously, it's informed by ancient Socratic approaches, but Socrates hanging around, as you can see in the picture on the left, talking to people doesn't necessarily work very well if you've got adolescent Australian students, which we all do. And so he sort of operationalized it into a classroom approach. You can see there's an inner circle and an outer circle, and the inner circle is having a discussion, and the outer circle is listening and sort of reviewing the quality of the discussion. So anytime you're doing a Socratic circle, you're doing two things at once. You're trying to teach them how to think and have a discussion, and you're also trying to get them to engage with content. So I just use this example because this room was uncanny in that it was designed for this. So the outer circle's got a little table to lean on, and the inner circle have soft, comfy chairs. You can see they've all got something to talk to. So they've always got, an article, a science article, a business management article about current trends that are happening. They've read it before class. So again, it's sort of a bit of a flipped learning approach. They need to bring it annotated with questions and thoughts. Something about holding something in their hands makes the students a lot more confident to talk about things than otherwise, because if in doubt, you just look at your paper and you read out a line that you've highlighted, and then you say, what do you think about that? And then the discussion continues. This is how my wife does it this is her now former school, but she always brings in candles and puts up a fire on the TV screen to sort of give a bit of sense of ambiance. But again, you can see whether you do it on the floor or whatever, doesn't really matter, but you can see they've got their annotations and they're all looking very thoughtful and actually attending to each other, which is good. And it's not subject specific, but again, you can see sort of lots of different ways of setting it up. So it's teaching them close reading of whatever you're giving them. It's teaching them how to discuss. You typically get a student to map the discussion like this. You can also do, my wife likes to do, sort of get them to keep a score of like how well they contributed. That kind of can make it a bit competitive or those sort of things. But obviously for a teacher, a graph like this is just amazing. Like straight away I'm going, okay, Brian and Nam down the bottom. I'm like, okay, well, why didn't they contribute too much? And were they just contributing to their friends? All those sort of things. Again, just different ways of mapping it. And I always note down the topics of discussion because I want to make sure whatever we're discussing becomes part of our retrieval practice, becomes part of our ongoing discussion, becomes included, so that you sort of bring things in. If you can see on the left, young Jasmine and her twin for the whole year did not contribute to a discussion at all. They sat there. For VCA, I would do one of these once every 2 weeks. So that's a lot of weeks, and they didn't contribute at all. But because they're filling in as they go, notes of what's happened, and they're reviewing their own sort of participation, I was getting really rich data from even the students who didn't say anything about like, I was thinking about saying this, and what I noticed was this, and I'm learning this about having discussions. Because of course, if you just think of how often in our classroom students are actually talking to one another and having grown-up conversations. It's not common. And then all of a sudden they're sent off to university and they're just like, okay, have a discussion on XYZ. And they're sitting there going, we didn't practice this. We didn't train for this. We weren't prepared for this, I guess. And so if you're doing it with younger years, primary or lower secondary, you'd be quite explicit. You could do like a talking stick or give them a ball of string or those kind of things to really make it clear to them how a discussion should go. You know, we don't talk when someone else is talking, all those obvious things. But even still with more older kids, it does help to, you know, to do some of the things that perhaps we as adults just do intuitively, like, I'm interested in what you said, but I disagree because, like those kind of polite ways of disagreeing that you might do with your boss or your leadership team or those kind of things. You know, especially because our young people are going out into the workforce, you wouldn't want them to not know how to do all these sort of things. Again, you teach them norms of sort of how to do it properly, what's expected, that they're having a discussion, not a debate. They can ask questions of one another. And yeah, so again, you're doing two things at once. They're learning the content, they're learning to talk about the content, which always helps. But you as a teacher are analyzing their ability to have a discussion and sort of teaching that. So, and again, you know, I could send these around and those sort of things, but these are kind of the outer circle are completing the left-hand column, the left page, I guess, which is like, you know, how well did the discussion take place? Who were the dominant voices? All those sort of things. And then normally you do 10-minute discussion, inner circle, 5 or 10-minute reflection from the outer circle who can provide feedback on the discussion and the topics, and then you switch. So there's no one not doing anything. But if you have a really shy student, like my example, they could be the one mapping who's talking and those sort of things, typically. And again, after the discussion, the outer circle, depending on how good at it they are or not, they might point out students and say, well, he or she didn't talk at all. And then you can have a discussion about, you know, maybe there's different ways of providing feedback that aren't, you know, naming and shaming, I guess. Obviously, we don't have time to do a Socratic circle, so I'm going to skip over that. But just to say, like, you know, the First Nations people of Canada have something called a circle talks or talking circles. So very much one of my learnings as a teacher as well was that for whatever reason, we talk about Socratic circles, but we never talk about the kind of Indigenous approaches that are pretty much exactly the same. You know, why do we stop at Socrates and just go, well, that's as far ancient as we go? So there was, you know, you could talk about yarning circles, and I would commend the work of Al Fricker, who does a lot of writing and approach of how you can do a yarning circle. Again, it's slightly different emphasis and focus to the approach that I'm talking about, which we've taken from Matt Copeland, but very similar in structure and approach. Similarly, Adam Voigt and others, Trista Holwack, talk about restorative justice circles. And again, so there's something innately human about a circle discussion taking place that I think we probably need to be, as much as we can, bringing back into the discussions that we have. All right. Last throw to you, and then I'll wrap up in 5 minutes or so and kind of send you other things you can read and discuss and engage with. But does anyone have any other discussion protocols or approaches that they use? Hot seat discussion, or some people call a Socratic circle a fishbowl. Are there any other things that you use to have a discussion? Hands up, hands down, hot seat, I don't know. Any thoughts? Plugging my computer, it's running low, it says. Oh.
Mhm.
It's never had me talk for this long.
You've done well. That's been very, very, I think, beneficial for me. I feel it in my teaching toolbox.
Cool. All right, I'm going to stop sharing just so I can jump to the end of the slide because this is far too many slides in this one. Rather than me flick through all the things you miss. One of which is, lots of focus on John Swallow. So again, I'm always privileged to be able to speak and participate in these conferences, though I tend to do it on the weekend after the fact because it's busy working in the day, but
Yeah. Some ideas coming, quick polling, circle talks. With quick polling, I use Mentimeter that creates those thinking bubbles. I think that's really, really powerful with students. Polling definitely is a good one.
Correct.
Lots of, hands up if it's a yes, hands up if it's a no, height of hands. Even as one that I heard recently, like by a show of the height of your hand, how confident are you with this knowledge? I was like, oh.
That's a new one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Word clouds, definitely. Sharing circle. That's a good one.
Yeah, anytime and for whatever reason, like with younger students, if they walk into the room and the chairs are in a circle, they're straight away like better behaved. I don't know why. It's just one of those things that you've got to try once to see how it works.
Definitely. Padlet works well with, I think, idea sharing too. Hidden thumbs up, traffic lights. I think that's a good one too.
Yeah. Oh, like, bit of exit ticket sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, topic discussion ideas on the board. Students choose a topic and then break into small roundtable discussions. Ooh, I like that one. Never done that before. That's good. That's very...
Yeah,
that happens at PD all the time, but I've never done it in a classroom. The whole, all right, now on your table, talk about this stuff. It's like, oh, well, we couldn't trust students to do that. Oh, terrible. All right, so we got to the end. We focused on ancient methodology, which is sort of, like I said, probably the easier. I'll have to come back and do modern because that's sort of often the harder sell. Or, it used to be. Back in the day, I'd have to, like I said, explain what a QR code was, explain that there's a camera in people's laptops. Now it's like, oh, yeah, of course. Just shoot on my phone. I know what's going on. But anyway, if anyone wants to join our book club, we run a book club off of LinkedIn where once a month we talk about books we've been reading as educators. You can look us up there. This is the book I wrote that has a whole chapter on Socratic circles that my wife wrote. It's really good. And I'm running a community of practice. If anyone wants to learn about or talk about including First Nations perspectives in the classroom, that's what I'm doing there. And that's pretty much the end. We can do any questions, anything that is what you found especially relevant or anything that was especially confusing. I'm highly conscious I talk too fast and have far too many slides. But apart from that, happy to answer any questions in the last couple of minutes, or Kevza, throw to you.
We do have a question from Gamdan. How difficult was the introduction of the calculator into classroom and its now observable residual effect on generations, and AI will have 10,000 more effect. What do you think lessons learned?
Well, it's a big question and a great question too. It's sort of, I don't know. I think it's easy at the moment to get caught up and think, this will end education. But as you say, like the same thing happened with the calculator, with the laptop, with the iPad, with the Chromebook, with the, all of the automatic pen, all those automatic pen. I don't even know what I mean by that, but you know what I mean, a pen. All of those things we sort of tended to be like, well, this is going to change everything. But yeah, I think what I'm hoping is that out of the age of AI, we get a better sense of what we as people are good at, which is having conversations, being in relation with one another and doing all those things. And hopefully our classrooms come to look like that more than, if you can produce a fairly substandard piece of writing with AI, maybe we focus a little bit on doing things a little bit more creatively and, writing haikus about business management or something, rather than just like, okay, we're doing another written response sort of thing. But that's my goal. That's my hope. I'm an optimist and an optimist, yeah, at base. So that's me. But yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks Kevza for moderating.
Do we have any questions? You can always email to us, and we can forward it to Stephen, or contact him through LinkedIn. He's usually very prompt with his responses. He's very generous with his resources. Check out his YouTube videos. They are really amazing. A lot of things to learn. So we would like to thank you for this opportunity. Myself, I learned a lot. I've got a lot of things noted down to implement for my class next year onwards. So thank you for being with us, Stephen. It's been an amazing experience.
So, all right. See you later.